Hello buddy, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be doing an in-depth guide for Nurgle for Total War Warhammer 3. So as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. Be sure to check out the campaigns as well. So I've got an in-depth Nurgle campaign going. I've got a Slaanesh campaign going. I'm probably going to start an Ogre campaign soon. I've already done a Slaanesh guide that I released earlier today, so check that out. And I did a faction overview for every faction and a tier list on top of that in terms of which factions I think are the best. And I have 4 different categories in that tier list in terms of battle power, campaign power, challenge, and then a fun factor where I just talk about the X factor and what makes things cool and interesting. So be sure to check all that out if you're interested. Okay, and there's going to be more and more content just constantly streaming in on the channel, so be sure to check back every day. You can follow me on Twitter too, at the Strategy Professor, or the Strategy Professor at the Strat Prof, if you want to check that out, just for some extra announcements, just in case you don't get them from YouTube whenever I release new content. I don't put anything political up. I don't put up like food pictures or anything like that. It's just another way to get announcements for the channel whenever I release content. Okay, so let's go ahead and start off here. I will say that I think overall Nurgle, in my opinion, is the most creative and interesting faction, and I think it is also the strongest faction, but you have to know what you're doing because they play out very differently from a lot of other factions. They have some pronounced weaknesses and some strengths, and I think a lot of other content creators dramatically underestimate how a well-run Nurgle campaign, just how strong it can be. Some people, I think, like Legend of Total War was saying he thought Nurgle was actually the weakest. I think it's the strongest. So let's get in there. Why? So even if you've watched some other content creators at this point, hopefully I can give you some fresh perspectives on a few things. Okay, so let's start off with the buildings, because that's one of the most unusual things to kind of work through. We'll talk about kind of how their structures work, what I recommend here, and then we'll tie it together with some techs, some skills. I'll show you how the plagues work, and then I'll give you some recommendations for things you might do early on in the campaign to set yourself up for success. Okay, so the main thing with Nurgle, their normal sort of cities are pretty standard, right? It's just like, I think it's like 1,000, 2,000, 4,000 to level them up, so there's not like that much special going on there. They do have a pretty good garrison, and they have pretty strong towers, and it's very defensible a lot of times, your towns, because your units are, they just have really high melee defense, they have high HP. It's just easier to defend your towns with Nurgles and with Nurgle units than almost anything else. But not too much going on that's really special about the normal buildings. Where it starts to get interesting are these other buildings. So basically there are 3 different types of buildings that you can get. You've got the basic military buildings, which are all 5,000 to start with. And then you have, and there's 3 different circles, and I'll explain how those work in a second. Then you have your advanced military buildings, which are all 10,000 to start with. So those are very, very expensive buildings. And then you have your utility buildings, which are all 2,000. So you can, mix and match whatever you want to do with those. And how this works is, whenever you buy one of these buildings, you pay 5,000 gold, and then after 4 turns, unless there are any modifiers, after 4 turns, then you get the unit that's on that card. Okay? And then you'll have another 3 or 4 turns, and then you get the unit that's on that card. So it adds 1 stock of those units to this global recruitment pool. It's almost like Raised Dead if you played Vampire Counts, but it's global. It's not dependent on an area. So you can see how many you have in stock, and the total amount that you have, or that you can have, depends on how many of those buildings overall that you have. So this shows you how many I have in stock. So I've got like 20 Forsaken. So I could just summon these on the spot, just summon 20 Forsaken in an army whenever I wanted to. Now they do come in injured. They come in, I think, at 40% health. So you want a lot of replenishment, or you want to make sure that you're going to be able to, take a town or do something to get that replenishment up. But whenever you recruit them, they do have to heal up a little bit over time. But you can recruit them anywhere, anytime. You can even do it in dash stance. So it's super, super helpful, especially for defending some of your towns. You can just summon up a lord, summon like 15 Nurglings or something, and maybe be able to hold a town. So it's really, really good to have that on demand, which is good because they don't have any sort of big garrison building that can give you walls in your secondary towns or that give you a lot of extra garrison units. Like each one of these utility units will give you like 2 extra garrison units. So it's not anything that crazy. And I think some of these, I don't think any of these give you garrison units. So it's just pretty much your main town, which gives you a decent little chunk, and then your utility buildings. So they are balanced around that you can summon up units to defend. Okay, so basically it just goes through this cycle. Now, sometimes you have to have your building wherever that cycle building is located, whether it's your major town or your minor town. It has to be at a certain level to complete some cycles. So all of these right now, it would go through this, but until I get this town to tier 4, it will not go beyond this point. So I cannot get the Plague Drones of Nurgle unless I get a tier 4 town. It'll just finish right here and then start back over down here, okay, at the level 1 again, until you get the tier 4 and tier 5 towns. So those are tier 4, and then tier 5 for this extra one, and then something like the Great Unclean one is tier 5. However, the Soul Grinders are only tier 3. So you only have to have a tier 3 town. So this means you can get it early in your main settlement, and it also means you can get Soul Grinder buildings in your secondary settlements. Right? Like I've got one right here, and I've got one right here. So, and this is what I recommend in the early game, is trying to get these Rancid Aloe buildings going as fast as possible. Because you're going to get Forsaken, which are actually pretty good with Nurgle. They do have poison, they have frenzied attack, but more than anything, they have some armor, and they're sort of fast for a Nurgle unit. They're 42, so that's going to allow you to run down some archers and harass them, or get some flanks if you need to get some flanks. So you don't necessarily need a ton of those, but just having a few of those are very helpful, because most Nurgling units are slow. I think those are far better than the Toads. The Toads look good on paper. It's like, okay, they move at 60 speed, you know, they've got reasonable melee attack and defense, but they have low armor, and I don't know, there's just something about them where they just don't seem that effective, where the Forsaken seem like they're a little bit better. Those are going to have, like, I guess they have similar weapon strength. I just really can't put my finger on it, but I've just always been sort of disappointed with these Toads. They're okay. They're probably similar to Forsaken, but the big difference is where the tree is located, right? This only gives you Toads, but this will eventually give you Spawn. This is the best faction for these Chaos Spawn, because they're going to have the Cloud of Flies, which gives them 9 extra melee defense. That's going to give them about 37 melee defense. They have huge weapon strength at 130. They're unbreakable, and they have a lot of health per model, which means that whenever you do your regeneration magic, which I'll show you in a little bit, is very, very strong. It synergizes super well with the Chaos Spawn. So you just have a whole bunch of Nurglings or Plague Bearers, and you just sprinkle in some Chaos Spawn, and it's a good deal. So again, they're not the strongest, you know, unit that you can get out there, but they're very good, efficient units, specifically with Nurgle, just because of how your army operates. And then, of course, the real prize are the Soul Grinders. So this fixes almost everything about Nurgle that a lot of people complain about. It's very fast at 75 speed. It has 90 armor. It has armor-piercing damage. It has ranged AoE splash damage that also applies poison. So he's very, very good against other ranged units like Pink Horrors of Tzeentch, or just any archers that you might face out there. So these are just particularly strong, great hybrid units. Most factions don't get access to their Soul Grinders until tier 5, but you can get it at tier 3 early on. And you might be thinking, okay, you can get it at tier 3, but each cycle time is going to charge, you know, like four turns for a cycle. Well, not so. Look what we've got here. And I don't even have it fully beefed up right now, but 2 turns on a cycle, 2 turns on a cycle, and then 3 for the final one. So how do you do that? What's the trick? You get that building early, and then you get over here, and you get this building, this Carnivorous Compost. And what this will do is -1 cycle time for basic military buildings. So it's going to take it from 4 all the way down to 3. And then when you do your technologies, I think it's in the 4th tree here, Eye Crusts, or which one of these? Eye Infection, Eye Rot Incubation. Get this technology ASAP. This is -1 cycle time on the Rancid Aloe building, the one with the Soul Grinder. So it's going to take you, you know, a few turns to get over there, but you want to rush over to that ASAP. While we're on the technologies, just really quick, it's pretty obvious a lot of the things you should get. A couple of things that I'll point out that I think are pretty good, that you may not recognize right away. Fecundity. you need to try to get over here and get Fecundity ASAP. This is what you want to use most of the time in your battle. It's the stage 2 army ability, so your units have to take a lot of damage, but it basically heals up to 5 units for a massive amount of health. It's like 10% of their max health or something, so it's very, very good. You want to use Fecundity in most situations, so that's one I would definitely get. And then the other stuff just kind of makes sense. The Nurgle replenishment's pretty good, but there aren't any other sneaky things. This Plaguefish Poppy is pretty good if you want to get Plague Bearers early, which can definitely be pretty solid. But everything else will just kind of make sense when you look at it. But don't just stick around and get all of the technologies. Just get to 4 ASAP and get to this. This is the most important one. This and Fecundity, like I said before, the 2 ones I would say you have to try to rush those ASAP. So that'll give you -2, and then there is a Plague as well, which we'll talk about the Plagues more in a second, but you can also put this Plague on them, this basic military, lowered by 1. So that's -3 on basic military buildings. And for some reason, remember, the Soul Grinder is classed as a basic building. And the same thing with, the Chaos Spawn and all of that. So it's by far the best one. Things like these, Furies are on a 10,000 gold building that's advanced, so it doesn't benefit from that utility building. It doesn't benefit from the Plague. There is something that does lower the time on the Living Tree of Decay, a technology, but just look at how many things you have to cycle through, too. You have to go through like 7 things, and at the end of the day, you're just getting some Plague drones, which are like, okay, but not great. This one is one that, kind of makes me a little sad because I do want to get the Great Unclean one, but it does require a tier 5 town, so that's going to take forever. And these Beasts of Nurgle are like pretty good in the early game, but I don't know if it's worth 10,000 gold. And you can only get the cycle time on these down by 1. So you want to spend most of your time, most of your resources just getting this one in particular, and then if you do want to get some Plague Bearers of Nurgle, that can work as well. So if you don't want to grow that much, I would say almost every tier, just get all of your towns to tier 3. Try to go horizontal instead of getting up to tier 4, because who cares? You don't get anything at tier 4. You do get a couple of building slots, but just make everything tier 3. It'll give you a much better garrison. And you want to make sure that you get the Carnivorous Compost and the Rancid Aloe in every single one, because this thing only applies to your local region. It's not your entire province. It's only that specific town. So you want the thing that's going to lower the basic building time. Now this one also helps you out a little bit when you're under siege by giving you that extra leadership, but you're mostly just getting it for that cycle time. So just do that in like literally every single town. Just Rancid Aloe, and the Carnivorous Compost. And if you can find space for it, Plaguefish Poppies as well. Just do that over and over and over again. Put that everywhere, and that's just how you want to roll. And then you can just summon Nurglings without a building. You just get those naturally just through these cycle buildings, any of your utility buildings, whatever. There's not a specific money building. It's just the military time building, or you can get one for corruption. You're already going to have 1,000,000 corruption. Usually that's not an issue. Public order, sometimes if you occupy a space where for some reason you don't have a lot of corruption, that can come into play. And growth early on. You can get this one until you get to tier 3, and then you can just sell that and get the other stuff. But yeah, that's just going to give you tons and tons of spawn, tons of just everything here, which is going to be great. So just sprinkle it in, run an army with like 10 Nurglings. If you're really rich later on, you can put in the Plague Bearers, or if you're super rich, the Exalted Plague Bearers. These are better with your supplementary lords. With Kurgath himself, you always want to do Nurglings, almost always, because he gets huge, huge benefits for those. They basically get double regeneration. But with everybody else, if you can afford it, you can get some Plague Bearers, and those are going to be stronger later in the game. But it's a lot harder to get them, and they're more expensive than just the normal Nurglings. So that's pretty much what I would do. It's pretty straightforward with most of the buildings. If you want to get ritzy late game, if you do get to a tier 4 town, like I said, or a tier 5 town, this is pretty cool. And just like getting some of these Great Unclean ones are okay, but I really don't think they're going to be better than Soul Grinders in a lot of situations. But they are sort of a fun unit to get. Okay, so there's that. We talked about the technologies. As far as what I would be doing here is they have this Plague God's Pasture that you want up most of the time. Plague duration plus 100%. And then chance of spreading a plague is 50% for local armies. So you can spread those plagues super well. And whenever a plague spreads, it restarts the timer. So if you start a plague in your town for like 10 turns because you got 100%, you have some other modifiers, and then it spreads to another town over, then all of a sudden it's going to be 10 turns on that new town. So this is just incredibly powerful. So always make sure this is active if possible whenever you put a plague on your army, just so it doubles the time of the plague. So that's really huge. Other things, this can help you out with infrastructure buildings, which isn't a big deal because usually it's just going to be the military one. This can help you out with control. Usually Nurgle's great with control because you spread so much corruption. And then this can help spread a little bit of corruption if you're trying to take a place over. But most of the time, I would just leave it on this. Okay, let's talk about, I guess, these unholy manifestations. They're not that great with Nurgle, to be honest. Your first one does give you a lot of replenishment. So early game, if your army gets busted up or you just hired a bunch of units and you need to sit there for a couple of turns anyways, you can do this. But it does make it to where you cannot move on the campaign, so be aware of that. You're fully committed to not moving for 2 turns, which is annoying. That can be decent if you're sitting in a town guarding it or trying to replenish anyways, but otherwise you might want to avoid it. This, I would just almost never get it. You can't move for 3 turns, but you have a chance of spreading a plague. It's not worth it. This one, if you really want to grow up a town, if you're really going for tier 5, that can help you get it really quickly. And then this one gives you a random plague to every settlement, army, and a province. That's not that great, unless there's like 5 armies in a province or something. It's not really that big of a deal. Okay, let's talk about the plagues here really quickly, because this is what's going to make or break a lot of campaigns, is how well you do these plagues. So you can typically cast 2 plagues per turn, or you can get a plague and a cultist per turn, and often it is 50 infections for a base plague, and then 50 per symptom, and then if you want to summon a cultist, that's an additional 50. So it could be up to 200 infections, and you can do 1 base plague and then 2 symptoms. And you can kind of mix and match what you want, and it'll tell you over here what you're getting. Now these symptoms are a currency, just like most of the other Chaos Gods. You know, just standard stuff. You get them out of buildings, you get them out of post-battle options, you get them out of looting, sacking, and you get them if plagues spread, then you get a little bit out of that as well. So the best way, you'll just get a lot of those naturally. You don't have to go that far out of your way. Just get normal buildings and just use plagues, and it'll make sense. Now, to unlock some of these, this is a campaign that I'm already in the middle of, but I just wanted to kind of show them to you to unlock them. You have to use the base plague so many times to unlock some of the symptoms. So this first row, you have to use the base plague 5 times. The second row, I believe, is 25, and then the third row is 50 times. And then these are just, they don't require any specific amount of infections. It's just a technology that you have to get. And these are like not that great. They're good. They're good in some circumstances, but they're not part of the big formulas. Now these big formulas, you have to have the plague and 2 very specific symptoms. So it's always going to be a base plague up here, and then it's going to be the 3rd symptom in a row, so the 51, and then it's going to be a 5 symptom from a different row. Okay, and then you're going to get everything that normally comes with that plague and all those symptoms, and on top of that, you get all of these bonuses. So typically you get a longer duration, so 5 extra turns, that's an 8-turn base. If you do that in the town where you get 100%, that's a 16-turn base. And then you're going to get 4 extra corruption in addition to the normal corruption. Most of them give 2 anyway, so it's going to be 6 corruption per town that's infected. So if your plague spreads to a province that has 4 different towns that all get infected with that plague, then that's going to be 24 corruption. So that's what I'm saying. Nurgle, it's like instant corruption everywhere, basically, which is really awesome. And then you're going to get an extra 15% chance to spread. Now, I don't know what the base spread chance is, but 15% is quite a lot. And there are other modifiers that increase that as well. Remember, if it's an army on your property and you have that commandment, then it's going to be an additional 50%. So it's going to spread a lot. And then a lot of these, so you can see over here everything you get. So you want to be using these specialty plagues once you unlock them, because you just get so much stuff. And this is actually my favorite one, and I think I recommend going for this one early. There are several of them that are very good, but you're going to need Ague, Mucus Runs, and Pestilence. So Ague is right here, and then you need Mucus Runs as the 3rd one, And then you need Pestilence over here, which is easy to unlock. Now, I will admit that the Egg one is not great early because most of the time you're going to be leveling up your Plagues just by casting them on Kugath. Kugath gets 50% off, so it's only 25 for the base Plague and then 25 per symptom. This really doesn't do very much. Like, it can slow down the enemy, which is cool, but you're just going to be spamming this just to level it up. So, it is one of the weaker base Plagues. Mucus Runs is very good once you get that unlocked. It gives your entire army Vanguard, which is cool. And then Pestilence, that plus 35 attrition, that's not really that useful. But why would you want this? Why is this so good? Well, the big thing is the 35% replenishment. It's just absolutely massive. Because this way, whenever you hire units in, they're going to be almost full health the next turn. It's a very big deal. And if you fight a tough battle, everything's going to be healed up by the next turn. So, I think it's just super, super strong. You also get the Vanguard deployment, which is great, especially because a lot of Nurgle units are kind of slow. So I find myself using this one a lot. And it's a two-way Plague, which is great. So when it spreads over to an enemy army, it at least does something that's pretty good, right? Like, it lowers their campaign movement range so they can't run away from you, and they take a little bit of attrition. On Legendary, it's not that much, but it's something. And if you happen to be sieging someone, if it's a really tough town, then you get an extra 35% attrition if that army has it, which usually if you're sieging a town, there's a good chance they're going to pick up your Plague. So it's just a really good all-around Plague that I recommend. Another one, if you want to be rich, and this is what I rushed in this campaign, and I'm not sure if it's the first one that you want, but it's certainly extremely good. It's plus 250% on your sacks. So I've sacked some places that will give you like 25,000, 30,000 gold, you know, a tier 4 or tier 5 each town. So that's just a really big deal. It can give you a ton of gold. So for example, if I click, you know, over here, I think I have that Plague on. Yeah, the 250% sack. So we're in ambush right now, but if we take off of that, this is what I would hit the next turn. Hover over that. That's 13,000 for like a secondary town. This one's 11,000. Right, this one over here, 9,000. So you get a lot of money for sacking these towns, which is good because I'm in a huge deficit right now because I'm fielding like 5 armies, fighting fronts on 5 different wars at once, which is pretty fun. But yeah, that Plague's really, really good when you want to make money. So kind of like the other one, it's not that great early on because it primarily affects enemy armies. So it's gonna suck to level it up. But it is pretty handy. And then you've got Pox. Now this one gives you 75 growth, so you get 50 here and then 25 off of something else. So this is really good if you do want to go for those tier 4 or tier 5 towns. You know, this is another one that is actually quite good to put on your own towns early because it is going to give you the 25 base. It can give you a little bit of extra control if it's kind of a hot area. This is that military one that I mentioned before, which is very good for cycling and getting some of those monstrous units. And this paroxysm is like super OP. If you put this onto enemy property, I really underestimated this. It's -2 local recruitment for an enemy province, not local town, province. So what happened over here with Tzeentch, I didn't even realize that. I was just getting it for the growth in my town. And then it spread over here, bounced off of these guys, and then came up here, and then all 4 of their towns got infected with this thing. So now it's -2 per town, and it lasted like 16 turns. So that means they get -8 recruitment. So he's sitting here looking like he's recruiting, but he literally cannot recruit. And this is his only province, so he cannot build any units. It's like super, super strong. It's ridiculously strong. I mean, it's borderline cheeser OP, right? I didn't even mean to do it. It just spread over there for my towns. But I was like, oh my god. Because I beat them, and then they were going to come down and fight me. Because I just beat a 20 stack over here. They tried to backdoor me, and I hired an army, you know, like you do with Nurgle, and got like 15 units and put the replenishment plague on the person, and then defended my town. And then they never sent another one back for like 5 or 10 turns. And I was like, are they broke, or is someone else attacking them? Like, what's going on? No, it's just that plague shut them down. So yeah, really, really good. And then, so that one's really solid. And then this one is a really good one, I think, to rush early on. This gives you 20% physical resistance on your army, and most Nurgle units are they're almost all gonna have 20% physical resist anyways. So this is gonna take it up to 40. And then you also get to summon from beyond, so you get 2 free plague bears. But the thing that's really nice about this one is whenever this plague spreads, then you get a Nurgling. So really early on, where you're trying to stock up on those Nurglings to build up multiple armies, that's really, really good. The other stuff is kind of whatever, but getting those Nurglings early is pretty strong. Now I still haven't unlocked this one, and this one is interesting. Palsy with the Grim Shakes. This is very good to put on the enemy, but it's a lot harder to spread that because typically you'll have to get a cultist. I mean, you can put this stuff on your own army, but it's not going to do anything. But this is the best tree to put on cultists. So you can just put Palsy on, and then Brain Fog, and then the Sweats, and they're going to have minus 15% damage on their entire army, and you're going to have minus 20% missile resist on them, and they're going to get minus 4 melee attack. So you just throw that bad boy together, put it on a cultist, and you're ready to go. And the thing is, you can summon this at any town on the map. You can summon a cultist, and it can move the same turn. So you summon it, go put it on their army, and then boom, they'll be debuffed. You can attack them and kill them. So it's really, really strong. And if you're worried about armor piercing, this is 40% armor off of everybody. So if you put all this together, that also takes off 50% of their spell resist. So if it's something like Khorne or Dwarfs that have high spell resist, you can knock off all their spell resist. And a lot of your units do magic damage. They have magical attacks. So that's really handy. So with that one, you would get the minus 4, you would get the 40% armor shred, and then what was the smaller plague? Bleeding Ears, Palsy. I think it's Bleeding Ears, right? 6 controls, sort of whatever. But I mean, minus 40 armor, minus 50 spell resistance, and minus 4 melee attack. That's pretty good. So anyways, the plagues all have different situations that are strong, so I would just have one of these cultists. You can carry him around with you too, just have him walk around with your army, and then you see some scary army coming up, or you're about to siege a tier 5 town or something, just drop that bad boy on him, and you're good to go. Now, there might be some other strategies that can work well. Also, you know, sometimes throwing this Sentimon where you're trying to level up a plague, just throwing this 20% spread can be good. If you're trying to level up Plague Rot or whatever, you know, just throw that on there, throw this Symptom on there for 20% spread, put it on your army, turn on that commandment that increases the spread by 50%, and it's just going to bounce around everywhere. So when it says you need so many of these, that includes all spreads. You don't have to actually cast it 50 times. Every time it bounces around to somewhere else, it's going to count. So it's really powerful early on. So yeah, just make sure you're doing your plagues correctly. Again, my recommendation is probably getting the Rot one early. When you start taking on the big towns, Black Plague is pretty good. The Growth one is okay. I think it's not quite as necessary. Like, it's got the OP factor when it spreads a little bit. But you don't really need to grow past tier 3 on most towns. So that's, like, alright. So if I had to rank them, like, strongest, like, what I would go for, I think overall is Crumbling Egg. Then probably... Well, I guess what you should rush. I would rush Nurgle's Rot, again, just because it's got all the Nurgling stuff, and you want this early. So I guess you want that one early, and then probably the Replenishment one, then probably the Sack one, the Growth one, and then probably finish it off with the Spell Resistance one. Because this one's good, but it's really to affect the enemy, and realistically, just doing a normal Palsy plus Brain Fog for 15% plus 20% Missile Resist is arguably just going to be about as strong or stronger than minus 50% magic damage and minus 40% armor. So, anyways, this will protect your army a lot more. The other one's more aggressive, but that's the plague situation. That's pretty good. As far as Kugath himself, I have him to the north, and like which skills I would recommend getting early on. Again, you just want to go all Nurglings. Like, I've got this 2,700 gold army. I was sacking like tier 5 Zinch buildings and stuff. These things are just like insanely powerful. It doesn't look like it, but they're only 50 gold. They have regeneration. He has an aura that also regenerates them even more. They replenish a ton. every turn. I'm not even in a town right now. I don't even have the replenishment plague on either. And then they have poison, which lowers damage on them by another 15%. You know, they've got like effectively 40-something melee defense. They're just really, really hard to kill. They are super, super efficient. Just trust me. It looks like you would just melt them like they're zombies or something, but man, I'm telling you, if you try them, dude, those things are survivors. They will not die. And so this little dinky-looking army with all of these Nurglings, and then I've just got one Beast of Nurgle, one Toads, one Soul Grinder, and then just Kugath and a couple of heroes, and we are just destroying everything. I've only been stopped once on a town. On that tier 5, I was facing the Tzeentch Legendary Lord, and he had like some tier 4 or 5 units or something with a garrison. I ended up trading with them. I lost like maybe 7 units. They lost like 12, and then I just ran back. I think it was right here. I like backed up, ran back onto my property here, put on the replenishment plague, summoned a whole bunch of crap again, 7 new Nurglings, and next turn I was back at it again before he could even replenish or hire more stuff. So it's really, really good. Now, what would you do with him early on? Like most things on Legendary, I highly recommend going down the blue tree just to get that cost savings ASAP. So I would just go Root Marcher, Looter, 1 point in serve or die. Unholy Resilience. This is particularly good with Kugath because he has a really high health pool and you can use him to face tank stuff. People try to focus out Kugath a lot as well, so sometimes he does get injured in fights. But yeah, look at it. He's almost got 15,000 health now. He's definitely a fatty. He can take some punishment. And then just Blessed by Blight. That's going to be 9% there. Lightning Strike is good. It's not as good as it is in Warhammer 2 because your units will start with like exhausted, like the worst vigor. So that's actually really, really bad. So you don't want to do the old school Lightning Strike unless it's like Code Red, like you're going to have a 20 versus 40 on your hands and you have to cut it off. Then you can. But it does, with 3 points, it does reduce the reinforcement time by 50%. So that does give you a little bit more time to, you know, put some damage on the main army before the reinforcements. And then just Renown and Fear is the same thing. Just a ton of really good stats. You can get the extra replenishment if you want, but you're already going to have a ton. Then, of course, you want to get most of these up here as they become available. And then I don't usually do this tree, but with Nurgle, I think it kind of makes sense. Get his survival stuff over here for a couple of reasons. You get this Foetid Stench, which lowers enemy leadership by 8, which is handy. And then you get Pestilent Decay, which turns him into like a little mini Mortis Engine where he does AoE damage. And like I said, he does get focused out a lot, so getting those extra hit points is good. So that's one thing that's a bit different. And then as far as these go, most of these aren't that great, to be honest, in the red tree with him. You can get the Nurgling stuff for 6% extra physical resist. It's okay. Speed doesn't matter that much. You're just going to be sitting there with Nurglings most of the time anyways. This one's actually pretty good. Gives you 12 extra armor for Plague Bearers, Spawn, and Forsaken, so you're going to have a lot of those because of the Rancid Aloe buildings. So that's pretty nice. The 12 extra armor and melee defense works really well with physical resist, all your replenishment, all your regeneration in combat. Those things just all multiply off of each other. So he's very solid. Now, I would recommend also getting an extra Lord in the early game and then just having him follow you around, because on Legendary now, it's only 4% more 4% more upkeep in order to have an extra army. So I think it's worth it just to have another person there that can fight with you, and so you're leveling them up so that whenever you're ready to make a second army, you're going to have a higher level Lord that's ready to go. So early on, if you can afford it, I would just try to grab an extra Lord and just have him tag along for experience. And whenever your Lord, and I would always go for the Lore of Nurgle over Lore of Death. Lore of Death is pretty good, but Lore of Nurgle is really OP. I can show you that here in a second. But once these get to like level 15, they turn into an Exalted Demon, so like this guy. And it'll take you back down to level 7. But this guy is pretty solid overall. You can get that Pestilent Decay, so you can get that Mortis Engine type of effect. Then they have a lot of health. It's basically just like they're a little mini Kugath. So they get a couple of extra skills. They are a bit tougher. They're better in combat. All that kind of stuff. So you do want to transform into these guys as soon as you can get them. And then your other Kugath army if you can afford it, especially whoever you try to send down here to deal with Kislev, who's one of the stronger factions. You know, feel free to go ahead and substitute some of these Nurglings with Plague Bearers, and take a couple of Soul Grinders with you. Okay, I think that's about it. Oh, I was going to show you the magic here real quick. So, I don't have it on him, but it's the same magic on any of the casters that you can get. I would just get max out Stream of Corruption early on. It's a pretty effective wind spell when you overcast it. I don't know if it's saying... I guess 48 is what it does, but it does pretty good damage. It's not insane, but it's alright. Children of Nurgle, which is going to replenish a lot of health. Well, not a lot, but a decent amount of health every time you cast something. And the big ticket, the whole reason you're doing it, is Fleshy Abundance. And this is AoE 35 meters, and it heals everybody for like 35%-ish of their max health. Like, there's no cap on it. You can heal all 20 of your units with this. And with Nurgle, you are just kind of staying bunched up a lot in just a huge dog pile in your fighting stuff. So this is super good. It helps, you know, replenish your lords if they're trying to focus fire out Kugath or whoever with their missile units, or they're trying to focus out your Soul Grinder, something like that. This is going to help you out a ton. So it's really all about that Fleshy Abundance. I just use almost all of my magic on that most of the time. You know, occasionally if I have some extra magic around, I might use Stream of Corruption, but Fleshy Abundance is just like absolutely insane. The only thing that might be better is like Life Magic, because they have a similar AoE healing, but other than that, man, it's extremely good, especially with Nurgle, because the health matters so much, because it's so hard for them to take health off of you through all the physical resist, the armor, the melee defense. You know, all of that stuff makes your health so incredibly valuable, because it all stacks in terms of survivability multiplicatively with all of those other defensive stats that you have. So health, really, really OP on Nurgle. Alright, so I think that covers most of the basics you would want to know. As far as early game strategy, I kind of tried a different strategy, and I don't think it was optimal in hindsight, but you kind of just, you want to obviously get your main province going. You do want to make sure, usually you're going to be getting attacked by some dwarves that start here at the same, and sometimes there are some more ogres up here. At the same time that you want to take your final town, your ports, you take these three pretty quickly. Then you kind of have to decide, am I going to stay up here and try to defend this town against these dwarves, or am I going to take the port? Take the port, okay? You need to get that ogre faction out of there ASAP. Just get them off the board. Yes, they're probably going to take this town, whatever, you can take it back, okay? So it is annoying. The dwarves just might keep going. They might sack Glutport as well. But it's worth it just to get the ogres off the board, because if you come over here and start messing with these dwarves early on, it's going to give the ogres more time to build this up and to, you know, maybe get a 20 stack down here, and then you just kind of be stuck in the early game. So, you know, feel free to trade towns if you want. You can even leave your lord guy behind and just throw some Nurglings in the army, and you might actually be able to defend, or at least scare them away from attacking you straight up, and maybe they'll just siege the town instead. But don't upgrade your main towns to tier 3 early. You want to do it eventually, but get your main town to tier 3 first, and then just wait on these. Don't put any buildings there to start with, because it's probably going to get sacked in the early game. But yeah, stabilize this, come over, knock out the dwarves, then it's kind of up to you. You know, you can try to go north after that, which is probably the best play. It does start you at war with some greenskins over here, but I don't think they would actually come for you. I decided to go over there in the Darklands and mess with them, so I just killed all of this stuff, and then I figured out, oh my god, the Darklands are so spaced out. It's kind of ridiculous. Like, it takes like 3 turns or something to run from here all the way over to here. Like, total waste of time to run through here. So yeah, don't go for the Darklands in the early game. It's not going to be worth it. So I leveled up. You know, I got some income from going over there. It wasn't too bad, but in hindsight, I probably should have just gone north and just clean up all of the Tzeentch stuff if you can. And then you can eventually go south after that. Usually Katarina will come up and find you, or Katarin will come up and find you. But typically, these guys will play nice with you in the fairly early game. So, yeah, I would just not go to Darklands and just try to mess with Tzeentch. Now, I thought Tzeentch would be kind of hard to beat early on because I'd heard from Legend and, you know, some other people, oh, Tzeentch is really tough and blah, blah, blah. They're not really that tough. They're really not. You know, if you're scared of them and you want to wait on soul grinders, you know, you could come over here and mess with ogres. Like, you could try to take this town if you want to. And going to Darklands is not bad. I mean, you could also come over here and just try to take these chaos out. I think you do have a non-aggression with these guys early, so you want to be careful with that. But, yeah, just get your province and then just decide. Any direction's probably fine, honestly. But it's likely optimal to go north if you think you can win those fights. And I think that's pretty much it as far as what I would recommend. Like I said, Rancid Allo buildings, military, get that cycling through, and then if you have a little bit of extra space, go for the Plague Poppies. You don't need the Plague Bearers with Kugath, but your secondary armies, once they start fighting tougher units, you want to go ahead and go for those. Just everywhere, tier 3, throw these buildings everywhere. It's going to be secure. As far as their combat itself, just keep everything blobbed up for the most part, and then just keep auto-attacking and kind of pushing forward. It's really not going to matter if they cast some spells on you most of the time, or they're like shooting you with towers or archers or whatever. It doesn't matter. Like, you're going to regenerate through it. It's not going to matter. Just keep Kugath kind of on the front line, auto-attacking. And then he'll be regenerating the Nurglings, and then he'll also be, once you get that Mortis Engine effect, he'll be spreading out the Mortis Engine effect on a bunch of people. Don't worry about the cults. Sometimes cults spawn places around the map. Your cults basically suck. I don't know. I don't even think they're worth putting a building there. Like, this has been there forever. You can, you know, you pay gold, I guess, instead of infections. So if you do want to get one of these buildings, you know, maybe the hospice, if a lord's going to sit there. But that's a lot of gold in the early game, 2,500, just to get 10 per. That's a steep price. And this one's just like totally worthless, a random plague, because your plagues need to be specific, right? You need to have a specific purpose for the plagues. So especially if it's just a base plague with no specific symptoms, it's not going to be that great. Yeah, that's pretty much going to be it. So thank you very much for tuning in. Hope I covered everything for you. If you have any questions about anything or any other strategies have worked really well for you, definitely let me know. And be sure to check out my campaign run through. Like I said, I tried going through the Darklands as well if you want to see a different kind of strategy early on. That's maybe not entirely optimal, but I do get into a little bit of trouble. We do get some adventures going on there, so it leads to some fun campaign gameplay that's probably a bit different than people who rush north for Tzeentch. But I've liked this. It's, like I said, it's one of my favorite factions. You have a lot of versatility with the plagues. It's really fun to kind of think through how you want to use those, how you want them to spread, all that kind of stuff. And just the fact that your units are so efficient and you can get so much money off of that sack plague that you can afford to run 4 or 5 plagues at once and have all these multi-front wars. It's just a very active campaign where you can be very aggressive and spread really quickly. Like I said, you have to remember that I had all of this at one point in the early game, but I just overextended and basically had to back up. If I had just taken Tzeentch early on and taken this, I probably could have had, you know, a lot of this map already green. So it wasn't a total waste. I did get a lot of experience. I did get some gold and stuff like that over there, but that's why the map is not like more green than it could be, right? It could be a lot more green if I just optimized that kind of early to mid game, but it was fun. It was interesting. So be sure to check it out. That's going to be it. Check out the rest of the content as well, and I'll see you next time. Have a good day.